Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Trump threatens a 25% trade tariff on countries who do business with Iran as he promises Iranian patriots that help is on the way. 4 people are dead and power cuts are imposed in Ukraine as Russia launches another missile attack despite ongoing US peace efforts. And fighting for her political future, former far-right French leader Marine Le Pen appears in court attempting to overrule her public office ban. Now, President Trump says countries who do business with Iran will face a 25% tariff on trade with the US as thousands of people are killed in defiant protests. Speaking on Truth Social, Trump told his followers that help was on the way as he addressed Iranian patriots. According to reports, the US president has been briefed on covert options in Iran after he warned of military intervention. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister says Tehran is open to talks with Washington, but is also ready for war. Let's get the views of Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. Jason, it's great to have you back on the show. Thank you for joining me. So Donald Trump has told the people of Iran help is on the way and to keep protesting and take over your institutions. Jason, him saying help is on its way is quite a significant statement in this message. I'm sorry, we do appear to have lost Jason there. We have a few technical issues, but we're just talking about Donald Trump's latest Truth Social message to the Iranian people. But we will continue this conversation now. Hopefully we'll get Jason back up. But we'll go to Sabah Baluch, human rights advocate and US speaker, specializing in Iranian minorities. Sabah, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's just begin with the UN human rights chief says he's horrified by mounting violence in Iran and is urging restraint. What's the scale of the crisis engulfing the country right now?
Well, it's very worrying, and it seems to only be intensifying day by day. The government is using new tactics to bring about oppression and oppressing its people, and it's not giving up in that sense. So, for example, today we've received news that even satellites are being shut down, so that the people are not able to, within Iran to be able to access channels externally, internationally, to be updated on what's happening, along with obviously the internet blackout, which is still continuing. People are able to now be able to, well, in some regions, be able to call internationally. So if they are within Iran, to be able to call externally, but not internationally within Iran. So that raises again a few eyebrows. Why is that so? It seems that it is a tactic to again silence his people and to control and perhaps listen into and to hold people that they can then directly hold accountable if they do share information that they shouldn't be sharing. So the regime is unfortunately stepping up its tactics and creating more and more oppression of its people. I mean, as you mentioned, Volker Turk, the chief, the UN human rights chief, did mention, and he said today, I quote, "The killing of peaceful demonstrators must stop, and the labeling of protesters as terrorists to justify violence against them is unacceptable." So we can just see when this regime is labeling these protesters and that they're within their human rights to be able, the freedom of expression and demonstration and protest, labeling them as terrorists is very worrying, and it does not give hope that there will be any peace coming anytime soon.
And I just wanted to ask you, because just before we came on air, Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social, and he says Iranian patriots keep protesting, take over over your institutions. Help is on the way. What do you make of what Donald Trump is telling the people of Iran right now? You've outlined how the regime is cracking down. There's an internet blackout. Things are difficult for protesters going on the streets, calling for change. And what does Donald Trump's message send to a country of nearly 90 million people where military action has been threatened?
Absolutely. Well, I think he is trying to encourage the people not to give up. We are here. And unfortunately, it seems that international intervention is perhaps needed in order to topple the regime that the people so desperately want to overturn and have something different. So I think he wants, obviously, the people to continue and the change to perhaps come from within Iran, so that this change is... The people of Iran have created this revolution. I guess he's just waiting, and perhaps there are things being put in place, perhaps, to intervene at the right time.
And the Iranian government officials have said the death toll following nationwide protests has now reached 2,000, which includes security personnel, and have blamed terrorists for the deaths. The regime appears to be cracking down with excessive force to try to keep a grip on power. We're talking about regime change, but what is possibly next for the country? Because this appears to be something that is difficult to actually make happen.
Well, you see, Leigh-Ann, the issue is the woman life freedom never stopped. So this is a continuation, we can say, of this movement. Because the oppression just continues and continues. And when there was this economic kind of turn that happened right after Christmas and the beginning of this new year, it was enough. It was like the people were saying, we've reached this level. It's unacceptable. We can't afford to live a basic life anymore. We can't afford to buy food. So the people, and when you hear the chants and you hear the people who are within Iran and talking about what they are experiencing, it is an existential battle between the people of Iran and the existence of the Islamic Republic. So for them, there is no other way, unfortunately, but to lose your life. I mean, who would freely offer their life? I don't think anyone would. So it just gives us a look into how dire the situation, the life is, that people have resulted in facing open fire. And this is what has been reported: the machine guns, open fire, bullets in the back of the heads of peaceful demonstrators. Even women, children even have been reported killed from human rights organizations. So it's very worrying. And unfortunately, this is the only way for the people of Iran they see right now.
Extremely frightening, the scenes that you are explaining, but of course difficult to get information out of Iran because we have had these internet blackouts. But let's talk about Iran, because we mentioned the economy is really struggling in the country, but Iran has huge oil wealth. It's actually part of OPEC. It's also so strategically important. What regional and global implications does the unrest in Iran have across the rest of the world?
So as you mentioned, it is a major energy and oil producer, not just for the neighboring countries, but globally. So as long as this unrest continues, this uncertainty is going to be about. And the neighboring countries, I think, will be the first to feel the impact of this unrest. I mean, from past experiences, we can say that oil prices have risen when there is such a kind of a situation. So that's just, I mean, the tip of the iceberg in terms of what could happen and the foreseen, the future. And you know, a lot of European countries today, Sabah, it's been quite interesting, have summoned the Iranian ambassador for talks, which I found quite interesting. We're seeing that in the UK and various other countries. But what can the United Nations and other European countries realistically do to stop the regime's crackdown on protesters and help those who have been targeted? What is their options right now? Well, the United Nations itself cannot directly intervene with the situation, unfortunately. So it's a powerful platform, and they can put pressure on the diplomats and the representative countries. But what the diplomatic people, they could do is put pressure again on the Iranian representatives. The UN itself can collect documents of the human rights violations that's taking place. So, for example, we've got the International Fact-Finding Mission for Iran that is still active, and I'm sure that they will then be collecting lots of information, writing reports that are then presented in the United Nations, the councils that are then they put direct pressure on the Iranian representatives there. So in terms of direct, perhaps very limited, but indirect, and the pressures, there are many. As we heard today as well from Volker Turk, I mean, he's the UN human rights chief, is aware of it, and his statement is very powerful, and being able to say this on the platform, the UN platform itself. So yeah, there are a number of things that could take place and could help the situation.
Sabah, Baluch, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, let's get the views from Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. We got you back, Jason. Thank you so much for persisting with the technical difficulties. But I was just asking you, what did you make of what Donald Trump put on Truth Social this morning? He said, Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions. I thought, and I don't know what you thought, but help is on its way was quite a significant part of that very message.
Yes, well, it's great to be with you. I thought it was actually a historic tweet for an American president to make, because it's looking more and more like the United States is adopting a regime change policy as it relates to Iran. Not regime change in the sense that the United States is trying to impose a leader on Iran, but regime change in the sense as the United States is going to support the Iranian people and create the conditions and try to create the conditions on the ground that enable them to realize their own aspirations. So I thought it was incredibly significant in that sense.
As you said, this could be a real historic tweet that goes down in the history books, Jason. But let's just talk a little bit about regime change, because despite these nationwide protests that we've seen, years of external pressure on Iran, it doesn't appear like the regime wants to let go of its grip on the country. This seems something that they want to try and embed. They want to try and stay in, even though the German Chancellor said their days are numbered. So what are America's military options right now, or options for regime change? Could it be something that we saw in Venezuela, possibly?
Well, I think you're right. This regime will not go quietly into the night. They will go down fighting. But I think the United States has several options, and they don't involve a ground invasion with the deployment of thousands of American troops. That's not what anyone, including the White House, is even considering. What the United States is considering are targeted surgical military strikes on the suppressive apparatus of the Islamic Republic, meaning the Iranian police, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and their forces, which are used to suppress the protests and are killing the Iranian people. So I think that that is what the United States is likely eyeing, in addition to cyber offensive warfare against regime suppressive apparatus entities, as well as jamming the ability of the Iranian regime to turn off the internet. And so the United States does have the capacity to help in that regard. And so that's what I think the president has in mind. Not to mention economic sanctions. We've already seen the tariff announcement that the president issued the other day, but also other measures and designations possibly of sanctioning Iran's supreme leader himself for human rights abuses. There are also the Justice Department in the United States can issue a federal criminal indictment against the supreme leader himself, like we do with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. So there are many options the United States has to be able to support the people of Iran and their aspirations.
So today, Reuters said 2,000 people were killed in the protests. Iran International says around 12,000 people have died. Jason, do we have any idea of the true death toll at all?
Well, just a day ago, my colleagues at the United Against Nuclear Iran, were speaking to people inside Iran to the extent that we can, and we had heard that there were upwards of 7,000 killed in these protests. So, the 12,000 that Iran International is estimating is quite significant, and that's not based on estimates that's coming from Iran International alone. That's coming from estimates, interestingly, where people within the security institutions of the Islamic Republic are speaking to Iran International TV, which is designated as a terrorist organization by the Islamic Republic. So I think that just goes to show you that there are some fissures and cracks behind the scenes within some of these institutions, that they're actually speaking to a network that's considered a terrorist organization by the Iranian regime.
And following the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022, protests did break out in Iran, but they were quashed by the regime and they've managed to hang on since. How do these nationwide demonstrations differ from the demonstrations we've seen in the past?
Well, since 2017, there have been consecutive cycles of protests in Iran that have called for regime change, not reform. And so I view this cycle of protests as just a continuation of that cycle that we've seen over the last several years. Now, I think that there are some differences. Number one is that this protest started out over economic issues, but the economic quickly morphed into political issues, and they're calling for the overthrow of the Islamic Republic. Now, there are other differences as well. The Islamic Republic's strategic and political position in the region has been badly eroded over the last couple of years because of their proxy and partner network throughout the Middle East has been badly damaged, and that's not to mention its nuclear program and the missile and military capabilities of the Islamic Republic itself. So they are a much weaker country in trying to suppress the current protests compared to the 2022 Mahsa Amini cycle. And I think that that's emboldened and empowered the Iranian people.
And China is, of course, Iran's biggest trading partner, and India comes in second place. How will President Trump's new 25% tariff be applied? And will China even be targeted in this? Because we know that the US and China have had lots of trade talks with each other when that tit-for-tat trade war started. And do you think it's interesting that Trump's gone down the tariff route rather than the military route so quickly?
Well, I view that the tariff route is just one of several responses that the United States is going to be coming forward with over the next few days. And so the tariff is just phase one. It's only the beginning, not the end of the U.S. response. That's number one. Number two, I think it just depends on the implementation of the tariff. And I would hope that the president prioritizes the Iran issue within the broader bilateral relationship between China and the United States. It's well past time. China has been providing a lifeline to the Islamic Republic that has enabled its suppressive apparatus to kill all these Iranians on the streets. So there has to be consequences here. And I hope the White House is going to be very aggressively implementing that tariff, because we have to showcase to the countries around the world that it will not be business as usual with the Islamic Republic.
Jason Brodsky, as always, thank you so much for joining me on the show with all your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, 4 people are dead and several others are injured following Russia's most intense missile attack of the year. Emergency power cuts have been imposed in Kyiv after severe damage to the city's infrastructure. It's a second attack in just 4 days, despite US-led peace efforts, as Russia continues the war, which approaches the 4-year mark. We can now speak to Richard Sakwa, Emeritus Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, and also the author of the forthcoming book, The Russo-Ukrainian War, Follies of Empire. Professor, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Just before we get into what's happened in Ukraine, Russia has hit back at the US over its threats of new military strikes on Iran, calling them categorically unacceptable. They clearly don't see eye to eye on Iran as they're trying to make a deal on Ukraine.
Absolutely. I think they don't see eye to eye on any question at the moment. Venezuela, there's a whole list of issues which suggests what earlier on, when Trump came to power earlier in 2025, that there'd be some fundamental reset, rapprochement between Russia and the United States. That's failed, just like the peace talks themselves, brokered by the United States, are failing. So Iran is just one other issue.
And Russian forces have launched the year's most intense wave of missile attacks on Ukraine. Is the timing of these latest attacks crucial or telling at all?
Absolutely. It suggests a new phase of the war. Most of 2025, and indeed the last part of 2024, while waiting for Trump, and then once Trump was in the White House, there were anticipations, and in fact it happened, endless talks in Istanbul and Riyadh, actually, as well, which was Steve Witkoff and Dmitry Krylev, the Russian negotiator, the assumption that there would be some substantive U.S. forced peace. And by the end of last year, 2025, it was clear that this had failed. This escalation at the moment is a response to, well, what Russia would see a number of provocations. Just before the new year, if you remember, 91 drones were sent towards the Valdai residence of Putin in the Novgorod region, all shot down. And of course, much debate over what actually happened. But certainly, as far as Russia was concerned, this was a Ukrainian assassination attempt with U.S. Support, because for logistical purposes, they have to have U.S. support. The second provocation from the Moscow's perspective was the seizing of the tanker. In the North Atlantic, and this was a huge thing in the Russian public sphere. This was an act of piracy, and other provocations is the actual peace process, discussions of the Coalition of the Willing, which was talking about the placement of so-called hubs. France and the United Kingdom promised actual forces on the ground in Ukraine, which is an absolute no-no as far as Moscow is concerned. So basically, the peace process is over. We're now into an intensification of the war. It seems to me absolutely tragically, but that's where we are.
And that's really interesting because it does lead me on to my next question. You said a new phase of war, the peace talks are over. But according to reports today, actually in the Financial Times, Ukraine's G7 allies are going to meet President Donald Trump at Davos. That's happening next week to seek his personal backing on security guarantees for Ukraine. You, of course, mentioned the UK and France there. Do you think this is something that Trump is seriously considering and could possibly even agree to, even though, of course, Russia doesn't appear to accept it?
Well, the Paris Accords last week were Steve Witkoff didn't sign it, but basically gave the tacit acknowledgement of some sort of peace, some sort of backstop for the forces. No, what's been happening the last few months, which has been much commented on in the Russian media, is that the West is talking to itself and, of course, Ukraine. So they would say, look, if you want negotiations, talk with us, because basically the Coalition of the Willing, and they're trying to get a peace, which is no peace, which is simply, it's as if Russia was losing the war. Well, as far as Moscow is concerned, it's winning the war. It's hard. And in fact, yesterday, Monday, the war in Ukraine is now longer than what the Russians call the Great Fatherland, the Great Patriotic War against Nazi Germany, over 1,000 days. So, and in fact, this landmark moment is at the moment at which it seems the hardliners in Moscow, who've long been criticizing Putin for going too soft. So we're seeing an escalation of the war. The West can talk to itself as much as they like, as far as they're concerned, Davos or wherever. But this doesn't actually change the facts on the ground, is that Russia's advancing, Ukraine is running out of forces. We could see, of course, the West has many nasty things it could do in its armory. So, as I say, 2026 has been open to phenomenally dangerous. I believe we're now heading to an escalation. And of course, so far, we've had risk management managed from Washington. In other words, not to escalate to a nuclear exchange. There are those in Moscow who are saying we need some sort of nuclear exchange, or at least a hypersonic weapon. This, for the second time, it was used a few days ago against the gas storage facilities near Lviv. So it's quite clear that we're heading into a risk management which Washington is no longer observing, which it has so far restrained the Western European powers who seem to have a lack of strategic sense, is that this is a war that can escalate and escalate quickly into a nuclear confrontation.
So just a quick question. Sorry, I am running out of time, Richard, but I just want to ask you something on that escalation point. So the formal negotiations between the US and Russia have not yet involved trilateral discussions with Russia. Sorry, the US and Europe haven't involved Russia, as you just explained to me. But where do peace talks stand right now? And do you think President Trump can put any further pressure on Putin to not escalate?
He can put a lot of pressure, but all the pressure will do is force an escalation. I think that this has been the lesson of the last few years. I mean, we should talk. I mean, there have been these informal talks, but precisely why Russia has designated Kirill Dmitriev and not Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. Yes, Putin has met Witkoff, but it seems that the spirit of Alaska quickly was exhausted, which was actually taking into account Russia's demands. No NATO, a demilitarized, relatively neutral Ukraine, and so on. These elements are ignored. So you've got to have a peace before you can actually have security guarantees which would support that peace. And we're simply a long way from that at the moment.
And I feel like Russia has always stood in exactly the same place it did at the beginning of the war. Doesn't seem to make any sacrifices at all. Professor Richard Sakwa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, former far-right French leader Marine Le Pen is in court in Paris today as she attempts to fight for her political future. Le Pen was found guilty of embezzling EU funds last year, banning her from running for public office for 5 years. She does deny the allegations. However, if the ruling is upheld, she will be blocked from standing in the 2027 presidential election. Let's get the latest from Al Arabiya English presenter Catalina Marchand de Aubrey, who is in the studio with me. Catalina, so there's a lot happening today, of course, in France when it comes to Marine Le Pen. Can you just tell us what this appeal trial is all about and also what happened in court today?
Well, just to summarize a bit for you, Leigh-Ann, Marine Le Pen has returned to Paris to this appeals court to challenge her original conviction for misusing millions of euros in European Parliament funds, a verdict that originally led to her 5-year ban from public office and amongst the other penalties that she is trying to overturn. So what is at stake here? So that's her entire political career and presidential ambitions as Marine Le Pen plays. This is her last card to be able to run for the 2027 French presidential election. So the appeal hearing began today and it will run through February 12th with a decision expected by this summer 2026. So the key issue now is whether the conviction and the ban to hold office will be upheld, reduced or overturned. So if the ban stands, she would remain ineligible to run in France's 2027 presidential elections. The result today, Le Pen has 5 weeks to turn the cards in her favor and overturn this ban. For Marine Le Pen and her followers, they're saying a lifetime of work and political service to be defined in 1 month. So this is still a developing story.
A developing story, as you say, a month. But let's talk a little bit about the 2027 election, because actually 2027 is next year, so it's not that far away. But if the ban on public office is upheld, as you just say, how could that possibly reshape the election we'll see in France next year? Because I don't know where Marine Le Pen stands in the polls. I'm sure you could tell me that. And how strong is her likely successor, Jordan Bardella, who we've heard a lot about?
Right, so it's being shaped anyways, because you can't really talk about Marine Le Pen without talking or mentioning her protege, Jordan Bardella, who is also the National Rally president. He's actually become the public face of the party while Le Pen is dealing with her legal battles. So if her ban is upheld, Le Pen would be blocked, as we've mentioned, from running for president in 2027. So this would clear the path for Bardella to step in as her likely successor. So at just 30 years old, he's been steadily building this public profile as leader of the party, and especially amongst young voters, he's very popular. The latest polls from November actually suggest that Bardella could be a serious frontrunner, even beating mainstream and big political figures in France like Jean-Luc Mélenchon or even Édouard Philippe in some scenarios. So his popularity now rivals and even in some cases surpasses that of Marine Le Pen. Here's some numbers. Around 49% of respondents actually say that Bardella is most likely to be the next president, and compared to just 18% for Marine Le Pen. And this is also true amongst National Rally voters themselves, who say about 70% say he is the stronger candidate. So these are early numbers. They can always change, but they do suggest that Bardella is emerging as the man to beat if he becomes the party's nominee. So French media even say that Le Pen has lost all her aura to Bardella. So even if she is able to overturn this ban, the bigger question might actually be internal. Who does the National Rally choose to be the 2027 frontrunner?
And it's really interesting that, because sometimes Bardella says, oh, I will probably go for the prime minister role, not the president role, but we don't know if that will change because, as we know, polling numbers do always change. But Catalina, Le Pen and her supporters has framed the original conviction as politically motivated in France. How significant are these claims in French political discourse right now?
Right, that's a typical French political discourse, actually. And Le Pen and her allies actually say this conviction, as you said, is politically motivated. So this is an attempt actually to sideline her from the presidential bid. So this claim does resonate strongly with her base and taps into this familiar far-right narrative. So this deep distrust of the establishment. So it's become a major talking point in French politics, particularly amongst, as we said, the far-right and National Rally voters. And it's nothing new. Nicolas Sarkozy made similar arguments with his corruption in Libya case, so claiming that he was being targeted by the courts and by left-leaning media for these political reasons. So this idea of persecution has real traction in France, especially within the far-right ecosystem where the suspicion of institutions is already deeply ingrained, Leigh-Ann.
Super interesting. Catalina Marchand de Aubray, as always, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. The UK is under pressure to block access to Grok, following the examples of Malaysia and Indonesia. Elon Musk's AI chatbot allows users to generate images, but has been criticised over its ability to produce sexually explicit deep fakes. The UK Technology Secretary says she would back the move, prompting Musk to accuse the British government of suppressing free speech. Let's get the views and opinions of Rebecca Hutson, Editor-in-Chief of The News Movement. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me. So the ramping up of rhetoric between Starmer and Musk has been brewing for a couple of weeks now. Why is the UK government threatening to ban X's AI chatbot Grok now?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're completely right. It has been a kind of war of the words between this government and Elon Musk, actually sort of almost predating this issue around Grok. Elon Musk has very much inserted himself into UK domestic politics. At the, last year we had him kind of getting involved in our grooming gang scandal, in migration, and now we are seeing this war of words over Grok, which is the AI tool which people are using to digitally manipulate images of women. We're seeing examples, it's so shocking, of this happening to children. We're seeing kind of women having, professional photographs of themselves distorted, causing huge amounts of distress and humiliation. And also seeing now this really horrific trend where women are having their hijabs removed or their modest dress. So it really is, targeting women and making the online space so deeply unsafe for them. And this has been rambling on in the UK now for well over, a week, which is very unusual, as you know, for a news story, considering how frantic the news cycle is at the moment. And we've seen, as you said, Liz Kendall, who's our Secretary of State for Science, and now Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, saying that what's happening on Grok is disgusting. These are the words he used last night when addressing the Parliamentary Labour Party, and now actually threatening threatening X with sort of taking over Grok. I mean, whether there is a kind of legal precedent or actually the ability to do that, I think probably there isn't. But we are now seeing a much kind of firmer stance from this government. And it's worth remembering that in 2024, this government was elected with a manifesto promise to halve violence against women and girls. Just before Christmas, they announced their big kind of white paper into how they're going to do it. And this is a great test of this government's commitment to that, because just because it's happening online does not mean that it is having a heinous effect on the safety of women in the UK and around the world. So this is, Starmer fulfilling a manifesto promise, but also a part of that ongoing row that we've had with Elon Musk since Starmer came to power.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about how much danger does Grok and other social media platforms pose for users, because I find it interesting that the UK government is going after Grok, but I understand that other chat platforms can do something very similar.
So exactly, I think that the online space and the real world are now increasingly becoming blurred, and crimes that happen on the internet have real world consequences and vice versa. And so this is why regulating the online space is so challenging, because we're talking about servers and global user bases, and in lots of instances, tech companies that aren't even HQ'd in the UK or the European Union in most instances. So it makes it really difficult. But the idea that you can post a completely innocent picture of yourself online, and it can be seized and manipulated by people who simply want to cause you harm, and it be circulated and seen by millions, if not billions of people, is yet another reminder to young women and girls that they're just not safe. And it's a reminder that you don't enjoy the same freedoms as men, and that your image is not your own, and that you are there is always a chance that you can be abused, which I think is the right word to use here, in the online space. So I think it is incredibly harmful to what it does to putting a ceiling and a self-censoring behavior on women. But you make a very valid point. This technology is available everywhere. It's worth noting that ChatGPT and Claude, who are those big kind of household AI names, actually don't allow you to make these, to request and query images and to nudify or humiliate women. They just don't allow it. So the technology exists, but equally there are other kind of bad actors and far less regulated sites that do allow this. The UK at the end of last year banned these apps, these nudify apps that allow you to kind of remove people's clothes without their consent in images. But there are lots of bad actors out there. But Grok, X, Elon Musk, these are big household names, and taking them, holding them to account and taking them to court on this, whether it's kind of the court of public opinion or an actual one, I think is really important message to women and girls everywhere, that you are as welcome and as safe on the internet as anyone else.
And I think the big question happening now is, does Ofcom, of course the UK regulator, have the resources needed to take on the big tech titans such as Elon Musk's X, Rebecca?
I mean, Ofcom is often referred to here as sort of being slightly toothless. It's our regulator. It regulates our broadcast, our airwaves, and now under the Online Safety Bill, it's got the ability to take tech companies to task. So it can now fine companies like X, like Meta, up to 10% of their global profit, or £80 million, depending what's higher, if those companies are seen to be in breach of UK law. How you enforce that with a company that's not HQ'd in the UK is a challenge, and is something we're yet to be seen. And we're also waiting for Ofcom to give us any indication as to when their investigation will be concluded. We know that an investigation has begun, but we don't know whether that's going to be sort of 24 hours, 48 hours, or next week. And so in the meantime, while Grok have said that now this functionality is only available to people who are paying, there is still this online harm happening, and it's probably happening while we speak. So it will be a great test of Ofcom's resolve, but I think the jury is out as to whether it actually has got the resource, the ability, or the might to get this sort of change enacted.
Rebecca Hutson, as always, thank you so much for joining me. A reminder of our top stories. Trump threatens a 25% trade tariff on countries who do business with Iran, as he promises Iranian patriots that help is on its way. 4 people are dead and power cuts are imposed in Ukraine as Russia launches another missile attack despite ongoing US peace efforts. And fighting for her political future, former far-right French leader Marine Le Pen appears in court attempting to overrule her public office ban. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for watching.